Of the Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr Chair, thank you. I thought it was appropriate that I say just a few words in response to the two speakers that have already been on their feet. And it will come as a bit of a surprise to the member who's just retained her seat, but actually I quite agree with her. This register, this piece of legislation, is not a silver bullet to solve sexual offending against children, and should never be seen as that. If I go right back, and this has been a very slow, deliberate development of policy. If I go right back to when I had the privilege of being Minister of Corrections, I was really concerned that there is a large number of these predators who disappear into our communities and nobody knows where they are. On their release from prison or their release from the court with community sentences, the police may have some knowledge of them, but time goes by and they can move on and they can just slip quietly into the community, and there are a considerable number of them. So that was where the idea came, that we needed to be able to keep track of where these people were. I did go and do some international research, and I remark on the comments from Stuart Nash, and there is a paucity of evidence as to whether keeping a register actually stops anything. What it does do, there's good evidence that it does keep track of where they are. But the difference between what we saw overseas in some jurisdictions and what we're proposing here is that management context around those high-risk offenders based on the analysis that's done at any one point in time on their circumstances. And that came out of a conversation actually with an offender himself who said, if you're setting up this register, I understand what you're doing, but I need to know that I can go, because I know when I'm slipping off track. There needs to be a way that I can go and seek help when my circumstances alter. I have a good idea of what those triggers are, and I need that assurance, that backup, that I can go in and seek some help. And that has been augmented by discussions with both police and corrections about those offenders that are at high risk, not just in one point of time, but throughout the time that they're back in our communities, when something can trigger a relapse. And in most cases, those offenders are taught to manage their urges, and a circumstance that changes in their life, losing their job, losing their rental or home, something that happens in the wider community, something that happens in their family, can actually have a serious effect on them. And so that management system that we're building in is new, and it is something that we should keep a very close eye on to make sure that it is effective. And I don't disagree with with having a good look at it a few years down the track to make sure that it is effective. At the heart of it, it is a known group of people that we need to want to know where they are in our communities and identify those who are at high risk and make sure that we can put some support and services around them. And there are some police that may well drop in on some of those high-risk offenders on a regular basis to make sure that they are okay, that they are living where they said they were living, and that they're keeping their details up to date. I just want to be a little bit pragmatic about the amount of money. It sounds a lot of money, 147 million, but that's over 10 years. So on a per annum basis, if it means that we can keep track of where these people are, then it is not a lot of money, and it does give some comfort and some tools to the professionals in order to deal with a particular group. I also agree with the speaker who's just resumed her seat that it is not the panacea, as I said. It's not the silver bullet, and by far the most dangerous people, the evidence shows, the people that are friends with your family, or sometimes in your family, and you need to keep a very close eye on what is happening to your children. I think that's a sad thing. You know, when I was a child, we roamed the streets, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, and there was a much more open way of living, and we just cannot do that today. We know these predators are there, we know the damage that they can do, and we have to do everything we can to protect our children, our community's children, from those predators. And then finally, Mr. Speaker, I know that Derek Ball is going to speak to his supplementary, and he raised the question in the House today. And in the research that I did, there are jurisdictions that have public registers, and there are jurisdictions that have non-public registers. All the experts, all the specialists will tell you that if you have a public register, you leave yourself open to the sort of mob mentality that we've seen on numerous occasions. In fact, one offender who hadn't reoffended for many, many years was working and was well rehabilitated into a normal life, had his house burnt down while he was out working in his forestry job, simply because someone found out that he had a previous conviction and they didn't want him living in their neighbourhood. Now, I can understand the fear that parents and communities have when they know that there's a predator there. We can all understand that. But if we want these people to be rehabilitated, and many of them can and live an offence-free life, then we have to find ways to rehabilitate them into our communities, and a public register doesn't support that. But for me, the most important reason was I wanted to make sure that all the names were on the one list. And the courts do offer name suppression in many cases in order to protect the victims. And if we had a public register, those names couldn't appear. It would mean you'd need a separate register, in which case you've got two places where you have to go and get information. And we all know that that may lead to people slipping through the cracks. So the desire to have a register where we knew where everybody was then, and the advice from the experts about the ongoing management of these people in our communities led to the fact that we needed a closed register that only specific agencies could get access to. And I have indicated to Jacinda Ardern that I'm comfortable with the change to the name. As I've said on many occasions in recent weeks, actually it doesn't matter what you call it, it's the way that this operates that's going to make a difference in our communities. And if that makes if it makes it clearer that this is not a public register, it's only for government agencies, well then there's no harm in making and calling a spade and having the name reflect that.
I call David Clendon.